It's the only plant of its kind in the country, and the federal government says it's putting a local community at the highest risk of developing cancer in the nation.
And recently, state and federal agencies started monitoring the emissions pumped from a manufacturing facility that's close to schools and homes. Ryan Nakan explains in the air of uncertainty.
Is it tougher to breathe some days than others?
Oh yeah, very much so. Some days you can't go outside. Some nights, it's more than likely nights, or when it rains, then they tend you can't come outside.
Bobby Taylor lives in fear of something he can't even see, but the federal government warns him there's no doubt it's there.
We run inside and turn off the AC and huddle and wait for it to clear, hopefully that it will. Not really knowing exactly what it is, and it's just sort of disconcerting when you find out that there is knowledge now about what this is and the potential that it has.
The potential cancer-causing emission that has St. John Parish residents like Taylor running inside is chloroprene. It's a byproduct of neoprene production, a rubber used to make wetsuits, athletic gear, and even drink koozies. The only plant making neoprene in the United States is tucked away in the small town of Reserve, the Dinka Performance Elastomers facility, formerly DuPont. The facility, which employs 250 people, began production along the Mississippi River's banks in 1973.
The demographics are not the same as it was years ago when it first came in. So that buffer zone is something that's very, very crucial to any industry right now. And I think that's the main thing that the community is concerned about, the quality of air that they're breathing right now, and they have to be concerned about that.
Councilman Larry Saraparu's concerns started after the Environmental Protection Agency released its National Air Toxics Assessment, or NATAMAP, last year. That EPA report puts the area around Dinka on high alert. On this online EPA map, the area is clearly highlighted, and the EPA pulls no punches as to why. On the agency's website, it states the estimated top 6 areas for cancer risk nationally are in Louisiana due to Dinka, formerly DuPont's chloroprene emissions. To give a comparison on EPA's data, the total cancer risk is 826 in a million right at Dinka. Just down the road in Laplace, the total risk drops to 149 in a million. And the farther you get from the plant, say Kenner, the total risk is 52 in a million.
And now you want to make sure that your grandkids or your kids, are not exposed to the high level that we've probably been exposed for years, unknowingly.
But someone did warn top Louisiana officials about the potential dangers of chloroprene. In 2007, when DuPont's neoprene facility closed in Louisville, Kentucky, the Steelworkers Union district director of that region wrote then Louisiana Governor Kathleen Blanco about the cancer risks involved with chloroprene. In his letter, Director Billy Thompson wrote, "The trade-off for a few jobs will be added pollution and a higher risk of cancer. The real cost will be borne by the citizens of Louisiana, not DuPont."
We need the jobs, we need the economy, but still no, if we don't have a community that can survive, we don't need them.
But according to the EPA, Dinka currently follows all federal and state guidelines. In a study released by the EPA, they laid out the following recommendation for someone who lives or works near the facility for a lifetime of exposure, roughly 70 years. The report says the safe standard for exposure to chloroprene levels should not exceed 0.2 micrograms per cubic liter. But that health recommendation has not been adopted as the industry standard. Instead, according to Dinka, the only standard the operation must adhere to allows 857 micrograms of chloroprene emissions per 8-hour shifts at the facility. That standard was set prior to chloroprene being reclassified as a possible carcinogen in 2010. But even with the new data, the industry standard hasn't changed.
There's areas that we differ with the conclusions.
Dinka plant manager Jorge Lavastida disputes the EPA study, saying the data is insufficient and overstates risks regarding chloroprene. But even while disputing the findings, Dinka's voluntarily agreed to invest $15 to $20 million to reduce its chloroprene emissions.
We are optimistically thinking that we could see some of those in the very near future, in the next 6 to 9 months. maybe even earlier. The majority of the emission reductions could happen in the next 12 to 18 months.
Any pressure that they can do to lower emissions, the better off they are. But does it mean that their kids are going to get cancer? No, it doesn't.
Tulane Public Health toxicologist Lou Ann White also believes the EPA data is insufficient. He says the agency did not back up its predictive study with hard science. However, she admits there is a risk when dealing with chloroprene exposure.
As I look at it from its chemical structure, it's chemically similar to compounds that do have carcinogenic effects. So to me, that would make me really look at it carefully, just from its chemical structure. I think at schools, they really need to watch it carefully, because children are going to be much more sensitive than adults.
Starting in May, the EPA placed 6 monitoring stations around Dinka to record chloroprene levels in the air. 2 were placed at schools, Fifth Ward Elementary and East St. John High. Some readings are near that EPA health recommendation of 0.2, but often the levels jump much higher. Now the average reading is around 5 micrograms. But last month, monitors recorded the highest levels to date, 24 micrograms at the high school, 42 at the elementary school, and 26 micrograms at the river levee. Remember, the long-term exposure recommendation in the EPA's report is 0.2.
The NATA classification is a likely carcinogen, and so we want to reduce this risk factor by reducing the amount the public's exposed to.
The state called in the LSU Tumor Registry to give an overall look here in St. John the Baptist Parish of mortality rates of cancer, and what they found was that in this area, the average is slightly lower than the state average, but the agency does admit that the state average is well above the national average. And experts with the Tumor Registry say they need to look at more data to study the long-term effects of what chloroprene does to people.
I'm really glad to provide this data, but again, the data are only descriptive data. Don't say anything about a certain person, Jane or John Doe, who actually lived very close by and got a lot of this exposure. I have no information on exposure. I only have the data on the disease or the cancer.
According to studies, chloroprene does have a strong correlation between cancer found in lab rats and mice over the long term. However, at this time, experts say there is no scientific correlation in humans. But there has not been a long-term study on chloroprene exposure in humans.
The monitoring only started this year, so we don't have a large data set. It's hard to say what the emissions were 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Residents feel extremely uneasy with a wait-and-see approach.
What is it? They're going to test it out on our community, on our children? What are they doing?
Does the EPA and DEQ have the ability to shut that facility down?
They do. They did.
What would have to happen for that to happen?
I think it had to be an imminent and substantial endangerment to the community. And that would be an interpretation, and it probably would be an EPA decision.
And right now you haven't seen that?
That hasn't been, no, that hasn't really been discussed in those terms.
What terms has it been discussed in?
Get the emissions down, basically. It's a risk. Get the risk down.
But while that risk is negotiated between EPA and DENCA, reserve residents watch a plant the federal government says puts them at the highest cancer risk continue to release emissions into the air near their homes and schools.
They want to plan it over a period of time. Well, we don't have a period of time. We have people who are breathing this air now. So you already know how you can fix the problem to a great degree. And EPA knows how they can fix the problem, but it costs money. So I say either shut it down or spend the money now. One life is worth more than all the money they can spend on that plant.
Now, DENCA is a Japanese-based company that purchased the plant from DuPont in November of last year. Again, it's important to note DENCA has not broken any EPA emissions regulations. Now, we reached out to EPA to see how the standard could be changed, but we have not heard back from the federal agency.